We're joined by the 4 former intelligence officials who went to Russia last week, and we believe they're the first Americans to meet with Edward Snowden, who've come from the United States, and they came to give him an award for integrity in intelligence. Our guests are Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst, Thomas Drake, who worked for the NSA, Colleen Rowley, former FBI agent, and Jesslyn Radek, who we're going to turn to right now. Jesslyn Radek is National Security and Human Rights Director at the Government Accountability Project. She was an attorney in the Justice Department's Professional Responsibility Advisory Office during the Bush administration, during the John Walker Lind case. You may remember he was found in Afghanistan, and she raised legal and ethical objections over the questioning of Lind without his lawyer and revealed misconduct by the Department of Justice. She was eventually forced out. So, Jesslyn Radek, talk about the actual journey the 4 of you took. You left from where in the United States, and how did you make your way to Moscow, and then to see Edward Snowden?
3 of us, Ray and Tom and I, live in the D.C. metropolitan area. So we left from Dulles and took a connecting flight to Moscow, and this was all carefully arranged, as it has to be. It always seems funny to me that people keep asking where he is and who's protecting him, rather than focusing on the underlying reasons of why it would be necessary to be in hiding from your own country. But all 4 of us were greatly honored to be able to be the first Americans to see him since Hong Kong, and to get over there and be greeted with open arms by the Russian government, Anatoly Kucherena in particular, and actually be able to see Ed and Sarah Harrison and just give them a hug and let them know that we had complete solidarity with what they were doing. And I know it probably feels very isolating for them, given all the vitriol you hear coming from the U.S. government.
Where you were in Moscow?
I don't know the answer to that. I couldn't tell you, even if I did. The security is a huge issue, obviously, especially as we have, there's a lot of issues with security, especially considering the former director of NSA and CIA, Michael Hayden, and the House Intelligence Committee chair, Mike Rogers, joke about putting him on the kill list. And there's been a worldwide manhunt for Mr. Snowden. That's no secret. So I think people should really look at the question behind why he would be in any kind of hiding or in an undisclosed location, and why someone who tells the truth and blows the whistle on massive illegality by the U.S. government, why they would have to go to another country to do so and then seek asylum from yet another country in order to gain protection.
Jesslyn Radek, what did Edward Snowden tell you, and what did you tell him as you presented the award?
As we presented the award, we each read from various other famous people in history, including Martin Luther King, people who were also smeared as being traitors and turncoats and hurting the country, and later history realized they were heroes. Other people like Ben Franklin. We talked about that with him, and how he was supported, that despite what the U.S. government is saying, about 60% of our country is in support of NSA reform. And I think despite all that he's dealing with, he is incredibly focused on whistleblower protection, on surveillance reform, and on journalist source confidentiality. So even though he has all of these other things going on, for him, he is incredibly focused on surveillance reform and that it be meaningful. And while there are a number of bills before Congress right now, most of them focus on the Patriot Act Section 215 and very little on FISA Section 702. So he was very well versed, very centered, very balanced, and very engaging, and has a wicked sense of humor, which was very, very fun. So I think we both felt mutually supported, and he knows that he's not alone and that he has a lot of people in the United States and around the world who are supporting his endeavors.
You mentioned Benjamin Franklin, and I wanted to turn to Colleen Rowley, former FBI agent in Minneapolis, was awarded Time Person of the Year for her work around 9/11. She was a division legal counsel for 13 years and taught constitutional rights to FBI and police, also testified before Congress about the FBI's failure to help prevent the 9/11 attacks. Colleen, what does Ben Franklin have to do with Edward Snowden?
Well, most people would not have any way of knowing that significantly one of the founding fathers of our country was vilified exactly the same and for the same reason as Edward Snowden. In 1773 or 74, Ben Franklin was Postmaster General, and it came to his attention that there were communications between the British and the colonist overseers that American colonists would not be accorded the same civil rights as British citizens. And because they thought they had to keep the American colonists, at bay or whatever. So they were not according American colonists the same rights. And Ben Franklin, to his credit, became a whistleblower in 1773, only to be vilified and called every name in the book by the British and by the American governor at the time. He was actually stripped of his Postmaster General status. So we can see how history and time changes everything. And in the case of Ben Franklin, it changed rather quickly.
Go to Edward Snowden in his own words. In his interview with Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras from June in Hong Kong, when he first revealed who he was, Snowden explained why he made the decision to become a whistleblower.
When you're in positions of privileged access, like a systems administrator for these sort of intelligence community agencies, you're exposed to a lot more information on a broader scale than the average employee. And because of that, you see things that may be disturbing, but over the course of a normal person's career, you'd only see one or two of these instances. When you see everything, you see them on a more frequent basis, and you recognize that some of these things are actually abuses. And when you talk to people about them in a place like this, where this is the normal state of business, people tend not to take them very seriously and move on from them. But over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up, and you feel compelled to talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you're ignored, the more you're told it's not a problem, until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who was simply hired by the government.
That was Edward Snowden when he first came to Hong Kong, interviewed by journalists Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald. I want to turn back to Thomas Drake, who you yourself worked for the National Security Agency for many years. Can you talk about which of Snowden's disclosures, of the many documents he leaked, which of his disclosures about the NSA were most important?
Well, the first one is no doubt that it was the -80 order, compelling Verizon through a secret FISA court order submitted by the FBI to turn over every phone record that it has each and every day to NSA. That's the first one. We're talking about a truly vast scale, well over 100 million phone numbers. Without suspicion, without any probable cause, not tied to any kind of investigation of any sort, just simply being turned over to add to the haystack. The second one that comes to mind would be the PRISM disclosures. This goes beyond just the metadata, which in itself is quite extraordinary, but gets to the heart of content, of subscribers of U.S.-based internet service providers hosting servers on which millions and millions of subscribers were determined in terms of the definition of their foreignness, giving NSA extraordinary and unprecedented access to those accounts on a routine basis through various technical means, either direct access or being afforded access by these same providers. And I think the third mechanism actually is beyond just the vast violations of the sovereignty of U.S. citizens, but also now the surveillance state going well beyond the borders and the boundaries of the United States and violating the sovereignty and integrity of nations as well as individual citizens and other countries through various arrangements through telecommunication providers, as well as the internal secret services of the respective host nations. I mean, this is truly unprecedented in history. And what we're seeing is, secrecy and surveillance are completely subverting security and liberty, not just the United States, but for many, many citizens around the world. Those are the three that stand out for me, although there are any number of other disclosures that were made that also speak to economic espionage, financial espionage, as well as other forms of misuse and abuse of access for the purposes of the United States gaining upper hand across any number of areas.
Ray McGovern, you said over the weekend, as you visited with Edward Snowden, that he had no top secret information, as you were questioned about whether the information that Edward Snowden brought with him from the United States was turned over to Russian authorities, where he is now, or Chinese authorities when he was in Hong Kong.
Well, Amy, it had to do with this red herring about the 4 laptops that he took with him to Hong Kong. You don't store a lot of information on laptops. You store information on other media. So in a way, when I was asked that question by Mark Hosenball from Reuters, what about the laptops? I probably should have said, what about the laptops? Instead, I said, you don't store information on the laptops. Laptops were, in a sense, a diversion. What he gave to Glenn Greenwald and lawyer Patriot in Hong Kong was a different matter altogether. The laptops were incidental to that. So that was the only point that I made on that, and it seemed to be a sort of ancillary point that didn't make much significance. I noticed this in the New York Daily News today.
Yeah. The secretive Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court has approved a request by the National Security Agency to extend its dragnet collection of U.S. phone records. The Office of Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, disclosed the court's approval on Friday. Clapper has previously denied before Congress that the NSA collects such data, but the Obama administration's touted a policy of declassifying select information following leaks by NSA whistleblower Ed Snowden. I want to turn to that now famous clip of Clapper in March telling Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon the National Security Agency does not wittingly collect data on millions of Americans.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
That's James Clapper. He's now admitted that statement was false and apologized to Congress. In June, Clapper sent a letter to the Senate Intelligence Committee saying he misunderstood the question. Quote, I have thought long and hard to recreate what went through my mind at the time, he said. Clapper wrote, my response was clearly erroneous, for which I apologize. I want to go back to Colleen Rowley, former FBI a special agent from 1981 to 2004, again named Person of the Year by Time magazine after the 9/11 attacks. Colleen, you recently were at Congress to hear more testimony for officials. This moment where Clapper didn't tell the truth and now said he's trying to figure out what was going through his mind to lie to Congress, are these officials sworn in when they testify?
Well, I don't know if he was sworn in that other time, but the October 2nd hearing, which was to discuss possible reform of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, neither General Alexander nor Clapper were sworn in. And this was in contrast to the law professors who merely gave their opinion on the law afterwards, who were forced to raise their right hand and swear to tell the truth. So, you know, when Edward Snowden says it's not oversight, it's undersight, I have been saying it's not oversight, it's overlook. Because in essence, the directors who are fact witnesses to what has occurred and have dissembled to the American public and not told the truth, and even to Congress. Senator Wyden was absolutely stunned to know that there were secret interpretations of FISA law, and yet have James Clapper tell the American public the opposite.
The New York Post published an article called "Rogues Go to Russia to Celebrate Snowden." In it, journalist S.A. Miller wrote, quote, "A fan club of U.S. traitors went all the way to Russia to give an award to their hero, Terror Watch secret spiller, Edward Snowden." Jesselyn Radak, you worked in the Justice Department. You were an attorney there in the Justice Department's Professional Responsibility Advisory Office. Can you respond, rogues to Russia? They're talking about you.
Yes, I understand that, despite the fact that I'm a legal ethicist and have served on the D.C. Bar Legal Ethics Committee. Tom Drake was completely vindicated. There's nothing traitorous about him. He went through all internal channels that he could have gone through as an NSA whistleblower, to his boss, to the NSA General Counsel, to the Department of Defense Inspector General, and to two 9/11 congressional committees. And they turned around and prosecuted him for espionage, which is one of the most serious charges you can level against an American. Now, if the New York Post bothered to do its homework, it would have realized that all 10 felony charges against Thomas Drake were dropped and the case collapsed in spectacular fashion. It would realize that Colleen Raleigh was never under any kind of criminal cloud, and instead Time magazine made her Person of the Year in 2003, the year of the whistleblower. And in my own case, I've been vindicated by the D.C. Bar and by the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. So I suggest that the New York Post quit trying to do the government's work of turning patriots into traitors and confusing fear with freedom and confusing dissent with disloyalty. I am glad to be in the company of people who went over to see Ed, and Ed is part of that same group. And while history will remember Ed favorably, I am quite sure it is not going to remember New York Post headlines to the effect of the one you read.
Let me put that question to Ray McGovern about calling you rogues or traitors, supporting a traitor. You were a top CIA briefer for President George H.W. Bush. You worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. What is your response to what is loyal, what is being patriotic, and what is breaking the law?
Well, sticks and stones may hurt my bones, and so forth. You know, it's almost laughable if it weren't so serious. I mean, take NBC, for example. Their top foreign correspondent was in Russia just a few days before we were, interviewing Anna Chapman, the fiery redhead who's going to start her own TV program, and they wanted to ask her about her wedding proposal to Edward Snowden. give me a break. That's all over NBC. No one asked any of us to be on the Sunday TV shows yesterday. Maybe that's asking too much, but the mainstream media here is laughable in terms of the way they treat this. They're very much part of the government apparatus, and they follow the government line. So if they're going to call me a rogue, well, I've been called worse things.
And come back to some interesting news that The Guardian is reporting on the editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson, about what British officials wanted from her. We're talking with the 4 former intelligence officials in the United States who went to Russia to bestow upon Edward Snowden an Integrity Intelligence Award. Colleen Rowley of the FBI, Jesselyn Radak of the State Department, of the Justice Department, rather, Ray McGovern of the CIA, and Thomas Drake of the NSA. Stay with us.